everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a What a Die. It is me, it is Nate, it is still February. Nate, how are things going on that side of the oceans?
I mean, shit. None of the candidates for Labor leader look particularly appealing. I mean, I know I'm going to support Rebecca Long Bailey, but like basically, just as Bernie Sanders seems to be ascendant in the United States, we have a coterie of sad divorced dudes who look like Uncle Fester who've decided that they just want to make the 90s happen again because then they can be young and have all their hair back. And so it's grim. Britain's fucked. It's going to sink into the ocean before they do anything to like actually fix the problems in this country. So it's going to be weird if America actually starts to fix its own problems. And I'll be like, damn, I made a great decision.
Don't worry, we're absolutely not. And even if, like, by some miracle, Sanders does get the nomination, Bloomberg will run third party or something and torpedo the whole thing. Like no matter what, you know, I'm sure England would have figured out a way to do this as well. But like, anytime you have like, hey, here's a guy that might, you know, do a thing that's good or not, or even if he's not able to do it, you know, he's getting a conversation started, and that's great. And then, you know, we as a society in America will absolutely just, you know, completely butt fuck that until it's, you know, buried and dead in the ground because we hate ourselves, we hate leftists, we hate anybody who might do a thing ever. You know, I think that people forget that in, you know, before 2016, our Democratic nominees were also just looked like a bunch of, you know, sad divorced dads. Like we had Obama in 2008, which kind of, you know, quote, rejuvenated the party and everything. But I mean, look, everybody was old and sad and, you know, wanted to go back to that great 90s feel, but while doing a war. So it's fucked regardless. And I mean, Sanders is great, but who takes Sanders' place when he's gone? You know, I don't know. We don't have anybody. So we're fucked too. Don't worry. We're just fucked and we don't know it yet, I guess.
Bernie Sanders is doing well, and it looks like he'll probably get the nomination. I don't know if he'll win the general. I mean, Trump's insane, and the economy isn't bad yet. And also, you know, they're gonna do voter fraud, voter manipulation, and all sorts of bad shit. He basically the impeachment vote basically turned around and said all crime is now legal if the president does it. So I mean, I know there's lots of bad things that can happen, and obviously, like having gone through the euphoria of Corbyn doing well, and then watching basically all the people with money and influence conspire to turn around and be like, up is down, left is right, black is white, nothing you're seeing is real. The level of just getting flat out lied to nonstop on TV and news, like the way that it was going. I think Americans are starting to get a taste of that. And I think the Iowa caucus was an example of it, but I can see it getting worse depending on whether they're in a position to. And honestly, I stay cautiously optimistic because, I mean, you remember that people were told that the exact same thing, like, oh my God, it's 1972 all over again. And then Obama won, you know, in 2008. And then Obama won, and he won twice. I mean, obviously he sucked, but I mean, at the time he campaigned on a platform that seemed like it was going to be trending in a different direction. And I think a lot of us aggressively interpreted what he was saying versus just actually taking what he said at face value, that he was basically going to be a 90s Republican. But I mean, in Britain, they were always screaming up and down because in 1983, the Labour Party got hit really bad. Basically, Thatcher won re-election, won a much bigger majority than the current majority that the Tories have. The Labour Party was hurt pretty badly, and they didn't gain power again until 1997. And at that point, when they took power again, it was basically by being the Tories, like being a right-wing party. But they were always screaming up and down whenever Labour did anything, like, oh, this is horrible, it's bad, it's going to be a wipeout, it's going to be 1983 all over again. And finally, they got their wish in that Labour wound up losing seats. They didn't lose as many seats as Michael Foot lost in 1983, but Labour wound up with fewer overall MPs than Foot had in 1983, and so it was bad. And so I guess the reason I bring this up is like this jumping, you know, adding in of British history is that we went through this with Corbyn, and we saw how basically everyone just flung diarrhea on themselves nonstop for 4 years until they finally got what they wanted. And whether or not, I think Sanders has got a different political style, and I think politics in America is different. And so I do think he's got a fighting chance. Also, like, it's happening in a way faster despite a longer campaign season, because basically Corbyn became the Labour leader. Everyone lost their minds, but they tried to coup him. He won leadership a second time. That they figured the 2017 election would destroy him, and he wound up winning seats. And so basically after that happened, they realized that he was viable. They went into full just fucking bend over and blast diarrhea nonstop mode for 2.5 years. And it finally worked. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that the level of hysteria you're seeing now, I can only imagine what it's going to look like if Sanders gets closer and it appears that he might win. And I think he might generally have a fighting chance in the general election. I think that he's more popular than basically any other nominee. I mean, there are a few states where Biden outperforms him, but he's on average, he's the most popular of any potential nominee against Trump.
He could take Trump. I mean, I feel like with all the people who are never Bernie, like Bernie would actually would pick up like workers who don't vote very often, people who last election cycle didn't vote would
or
vote
working class
year.
People who voted for Trump, like
right.
There was a weird kind of takeaway from the Nevada caucus that a lot of people who are not like tied in politically perceive Sanders as a moderate instead of a radical, because as I can best interpret it, it seems like their impression of what counts as radical versus moderate is how like Democratic Party partisan you are. Like Nancy Pelosi is more radical than Bernie Sanders to them because she's the face of the Democratic Party. And in a way that's weird, but I mean, hey, I'll take it, because if they see something different than the same old bullshit that always leads to bad outcomes, that's a positive thing, I think.
Do you want to hear the word? I fucking saw the worst meme ever in my entire life. I decided to put a drill bit to my forehead and give myself a lobotomy, and went to the neoliberal subreddit. And there was a thing on there, the Jeb meme where you'd like put a Nevada, but all the counties are yellow and it's Jeb, arms wide and staring up to the sky.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
They did that with Purple and Maggie Thatcher, and I about threw a win. Like, I don't even understand how that's neoliberal other than having a lobotomy. So, anyway, let's talk about other people who are shitting themselves. New York Times opinion, a place that we all love to go and yell because New York Times kind of gives anybody like a chance to say some shit. Recently, 2017, they gave Erick Prince an opportunity to go onto the New York Times and talk about how we should be privatizing the military because Erick Prince wants more, blood diamonds to, adorn his altar of death or something. So this time around, we've got Sirajuddin Haqqani, the deputy second in command, chief in charge of most things of the Taliban, getting a chance to write an op-ed. Nate, I read the op-ed yesterday. It was fine. There was nothing really impressive about what he was saying. Basically, it's what we, the Taliban, want. And it seems like the Taliban also wants to, stop getting killed and shooting and blowing things up. However, the response from your everyday average American is just shitting the bed. And I wanted to talk about it because it's incredible that like how after like almost 20 years of war, we've got America trying to make, headway into peace talks with the Taliban. And then you have, what the Taliban want? Oh, they want peace too. Wow, this, it makes sense then. We're all one big, happy global family of people who want to stop getting the shit blown out of them. And then you have, Task and Purpose. You've got CNN. You've got all these people who are like, well, the thing they didn't tell you about Haqqani is he's also bad. Motherfucker, we know. Like, I don't know if anybody, like, historically, Nate, and I really feel like the American propaganda machine did a fantastic job of this. We went into Afghanistan. We didn't go to war with Afghanistan. We didn't go to war with the Taliban. We went to go dig out Al-Qaeda, and somehow the Taliban became our new mission. There's like a weird bait and switch because like the Taliban basically got pushed out of power when we showed up, and they said, that's kind of fucked up. We had power. We want to have our power back. And we said, no, you guys are bad, which, yes, they were. I mean, no fucking denying that the Taliban were not great people. However, if, our American government got pushed out of power by some foreign influence, they would probably fight to get it back too. It might involve some blowing some shit up, taking prisoners and all this. And it's just like, I mean, I don't know, Nate. I don't really give a fuck that Haqqani got a. I thought it was a little surprising. Again, I read it. I didn't find it all that like inspiring or anything like surprising about what he was saying. But I just find this like weird. Like what I don't know what these people want. I don't know what CNN. This guy who wrote this article for CNN, who's just like what the New York Times isn't telling you about Haqqani. Do you want us to keep doing war against the Taliban? Because that's not a fight we're going to win.
Also, I'd point out that Sirajuddin Haqqani is the son of Jalaluddin Haqqani, who was one of the Mujahideen leaders fighting the Soviet Union in the 1980s, who then became a warlord fighting for control of Afghanistan after the Soviet Union withdrew its military forces. So in a way, it's weird because the Haqqani network were always kind of loosely confederated as part of the Taliban, but they're a different group that more or less came to fight under the Taliban banner in the same way that other people like Hekmatyar and famous horrible warlords did. If you're interested, I mean, basically, there's a lot of the Taliban has changed, and the insurgency was never one top-down organization. But where I was in Afghanistan in 2009 in Paktika province, that whole area, Paktia, Host, and Ghazni provinces, is where there's a tribal group called the Zadrans, and that's who the Haqqanis represent. And so, in a way, they were the head organization of the insurgency against both the U.S. and NATO occupation force and the Afghan government that we had installed. So to talk about them as though they lack legitimacy, well, I mean, are they bad? Yes, but they are combatants in a war being fought in their home country. So I don't think any one of them, I mean, you're not going to bring the Taliban to a peace agreement by only negotiating with, NGOs that operate under a code of nonviolence. This is a war that's been going on more or less since the early 70s, since the king was deposed, and certainly since 1979. So the idea that this is something you could just bloodlessly bring to the table, I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. And I don't necessarily think the New York Times deserves criticism for giving the Taliban or Sirajuddin Haqqani a voice in this sense, because, I mean, to me, it's very telling if you get mad about this, but you don't get mad about the Eric Prince thing. I mean, I think the New York Times, allowing people like the guy, whoever the fucking Erickson to write an op-ed when he literally like goes on his Twitter and posts photos of him shooting holes in the New York Times' front page with his gun, very, very inaccurately because he sucks at shooting. Or people like having columnists like Brett Stevens just do fabrication after fabrication. Like, the New York Times has already sullied its own fucking standing without needing to, get the finger pointed at it because of the Haqqanis being in there. I think, to me at least, what this has revealed is that there's a very different category of Afghanistan interested person. There's the person who's following the details, the day-to-day on the ground, the reporting from Afghanistan, and understands, what a peace agreement is going to look like. And then there are people who are just kind of like, they memorized some talking points 15 years ago and they'll never fucking stop saying them. And to be honest with you, like the latter group, I just don't have any time for because they're useless. I remember them screaming about this, about, Haqqani, Hekmatyar, all these other people about how dare, General Petraeus try to bring these people to the table. We should be drone striking them. It's just at a certain point, it's like, bitch, this is their home country. Like, this is where they're from. They're never going to stop fighting until foreign troops leave. Like, that's just how it's going to be. They're not going to give up. You will not be able to colonize them. Stop fucking trying. And let's extricate ourselves from this bleeding wound that we've had for 19 years. Like, how, at this point, no matter what your intentions, there is zero chance we are going to turn the corner and succeed based on what we've been doing for the past 19 years. It hasn't worked. It won't work. It's just wasting lives. Stop fucking trying to do it over and over again. And so to me, any kind of selective outrage about this is just people, they're just stroking their own ego. I'm saying that as politely as I can, and I just have zero time for it.
Yeah, there's like you said, this is not a war. This is not a war that's winnable because you have this entire power here of the Taliban who had power. They had power once upon a time. And you trying to say, us trying to say you don't get to have a say in the Afghan government, you will no longer be a part of this. Like, the Afghan government is a puppet government. It's one that we installed. It's one that we have done everything we can to bolster up, and I'm not an Afghan. I can't
Crucially, it has got a certain degree of legitimacy with the Afghan populace, but just a very tenuous amount of it. And so anything that destabilizes it, that makes it seem as though it only represents foreign interests or only represents the interests of one ethnic group, it's going to cause it to fall apart. And then you go right back to, basically the end of the Soviet occupation in 1990, where, you have the civil war starting, and that's when the worst violence, that's when Kabul was destroyed, all that kind of stuff. Like that's where it got really bad.
Yeah, so you've got a power here that has been deposed, and they want some kind of legitimate power back to it, and they will not stop until they have that. And again, you're just not, like, the idea that we could eradicate the Taliban without doing massive amounts of war crimes. And I mean, Nate, I don't mean like the kind of war crimes we do now. I'm talking like we have to go in with just a bloody, let's just start murdering everybody, start dropping nuclear bombs. Like, that's the only way. And then, there's nothing, you're going to stand on this, irradiated platform and say, look at this, look how free it is. We've killed everybody. There's no Taliban here. We win. This is not a war of attrition. This is not even a war. Like, this is us constantly stepping on our dicks over, an insurgency that, we have nothing to do. We should have nothing to do with. Like, look, the Taliban's going to have power. Like, I don't know. I kind of feel like they're a, they are kind of like a political party. Like, you wouldn't start saying, sorry, I don't know, Tories, you don't get to be a part of this. And the Tory, I don't know if the Tories would start setting up roadside bombs, but I know all the old pasty white people that make up the Tories would start saying that they would, and then immediately throw their backs out as soon as they have to put a shovel into the dirt. Same with most conservatives as well here. But it's just a war that we're not going to win. And like I said, I don't know what, saying this, hands on hip, haughtily saying, how dare you, Haqqani and the Taliban and this, that, and the other thing. And, it's always going to come back around to, well, what about the girls? I mean, even Haqqani in here is like, look, we want to send girls to school, it's within keeping with Islam. And you know what? Fucking maybe they won't. How many times have we been, just forking and funneling money into, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, a place that, like, the moderate prince has finally let women fucking drive. Like, we don't give a fuck about the women there. We don't give a fuck about what's, like, at this point in time, it is literally, we don't want to take an L. And, like, we don't have to. I feel like a peace agreement is a win for everybody, but nobody wants that. Like, Americans don't see that as a win. Americans don't see peace as a win. We see the complete eradication of our enemy as a win. And I feel like a lot of Americans, especially the chud-like pundit class who makes their money by banging out angry things on New York Times or Washington Post or CNN, are going to, again, hands on hip and say, well, we lost because we walked out of there and things aren't going to be any better. Like, fucking, maybe it will be and maybe it won't be, but that destiny is not ours to decide anymore. And like you said, that local government that's there has some kind of legitimacy, and the best thing that we could do is step away and say, all right, you guys figure it out from here. We'll help you if you want, but I'm sure that you kind of want to do this on your own. I don't know. Look, I want to reiterate, this is not a 100, this is not a pro-Taliban, podcast, but this is a pro, stop fucking getting killed in Afghanistan. Stop wasting lives and money over there. When we've got our own problems here kind of podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that you're going to have to convene some people whose views you dislike in order to get a solution that works in this country. The Taliban, like it or not, represent a significant chunk, if not the majority, of Pashtun people who don't live in major urban centers. I mean, flat out. And quite frankly, that's a significant chunk of the country's population in the South and in the East. So you might say, go Woodrow Wilson and say, okay, well, we're going to teach you a lesson to elect good people, and we'll just keep teaching that lesson over and over again. Well, they're going to teach you some lessons, i.e. blowing you the fuck up every time you try to enforce stuff in that country. Like, I'm sorry, but we're not their police force. We're not their, civil military development agency. We've fucked things up there. We've made things worse. And the best thing that can happen is that there is an agreement among all parties that allows Afghanistan to stop fighting a war so that they can actually have a sustained period of peace in which people have a say in the government, in which it actually holds things together so that their economy can grow and so people can, escape poverty and not be living in fear. I mean, flat out. It's an incredibly bad situation. It's driving part of the refugee situation across Central and Western Europe, and also in Western Asia, that people flee Afghanistan because there's zero chance for them to support themselves, and also because their lives are in danger. So that you've got to look. I mean, people want to talk about, well, what happens? Are we going to betray all these girls who are supposed to be going to school? It's like, well, like I said before on the show, many and many a time, if you go to rural Afghanistan in the south and east of the country, girls are probably not going to school already because it's too dangerous, because there's a fucking war going on that we're fighting and we're making worse. Secondly, how many people are missing out on education because they're fleeing the country as children, sometimes as unaccompanied children, to try to travel in the back of fucking meat trucks to get to the United Kingdom or to get to Western Europe, to get to Germany, to get to France. You know what I mean? Like, the war is making people unable to live normal lives in Afghanistan. You've got to stop that problem first. And this seems like a chance to do that. And it's very rich for people who live in the United States, who live in fucking Arlington, Virginia or whatever, in Raytheon Acres, to complain about, like, how dare you? It's like, y'all let Erik Prince write an op-ed, and you didn't complain about the Times doing that when that guy's a legit war criminal and a fascist, a Christian fascist. So honestly, him and Sirajuddin Haqqani are just balance. Like, the fuck's wrong with you? Like, it's a stupid. I mean, Christian dominionists are no different in their actual views than the Taliban, flat out, and their willingness to use violence. They don't have to build homemade explosives with fucking fertilizer. They can just join the military or the police.
Yeah,
like, or don't fool yourself.
Or become Blackwater and just buy them, from Raytheon as a gift. Hey, we've got some brand new explosives and jets and helicopters to take over and continue this fucking gross ass weird war on Islam that we're waging for you, America. It's like, there always seems to be some weird underground religious war happening that America is trying to wage that the rest of us are just kind of like dragged along with for one reason or another. Anyway, I just it's all the people that you expect. Like the CNN article that I read about it by this guy Peter Bergen, and he's got a new book coming, Trump and His Generals: The Cost of Chaos. And you look at him, and he's absolutely the kind of guy who, like, at a dinner party would corner you and talk to you about, like, why the Iranian Revolution was good and why killing communists is good. He's got that look, that a dad who's like, a never Trump Republican, but has a picture of Ronald Reagan in his wallet at all times. Is that kind of guy. So fuck him. War's bad. Stop doing war, man. Stop. If the Taliban want to negotiate, let's fucking negotiate. Because again, that's not even who we're fighting in the first place. Like, Al Qaeda, Bin Laden's dead, man. He's been dead since 2011. Fucking, the Taliban is killing fucking police officers in Afghanistan on a regular basis. And if you actually give a fuck about that, if you want, like, the Afghan forces to not get their shit murdered constantly, then, I mean, that is 100% because we are there. If we stop being there, that will drop off dramatically because they don't fucking want us there, man. The Iraqis don't want us there. The Afghans don't want us there. Surprisingly enough, when you spend 20 years just dropping a massive amount of ordnance that's not only killing people but causing like horrible birth defects. Like, if you ever want to feel shitty about yourself, look up birth defects in Iraq due to depleted uranium, and it'll kind of make you want to throw everybody in politics off of a cliff, except our boy Bernie, who voted against that shit.
Yeah. So, and I mean, to be honest, Bernie Sanders is, compared to similar left parties and politicians in other countries, is probably more towards the center. But in American politics, he's absolutely on the left. And so,
foreign policy-wise, Bernie's not great. But you know what? We all got our blind spots.
He's better than he's better than basically any other potential presidential candidate that we've had. So, I mean, at least in our lifetimes. So, in that regard, I'm hopeful, cautiously hopeful, as I live in what proves to be just sinking island of dumb Tory nonsense. But we also wanted to talk about something else. And I think before we even talk about Office Jim, who's a moron, and the various respect the troops sort of platitudes that he's put out about doing new Tom Clancy TV where he has to depose, Nicolas Maduro or whatever, I think that there is a weird moment that we're starting to see with people trying to resurrect the Cold War to use as a cudgel against Bernie Sanders. You saw it this morning, Francis, with Ana Navarro, famous daughter of the Contras, talking about how actually literacy in Cuba is bad because they teach you to be anti-American, and so it's better to not know how to read. Similarly, in Nicaragua, she says. And I think about this. I don't really think, just as it's really dumb when people bring up the 1972 election and George McGovern, considering that they lowered the voting age in 1971, so 18-year-olds could vote in 1972. So as such, if you turned 18 on election day in 1972 and you were allowed to vote, you were thereby the youngest person able to vote in 1972, you would be either 65 or 66 years old, depending. Basically, on election day this year, you would be turning 66. So that's how, basically, most people who voted in that election are dead. The idea that it's this cultural touchstone in 1972, where they're like, "Oh, you don't want to nominate McGovern, you might repeat the disaster of Check's Notes 1925," is so fucking long ago. It's so long ago. And so the idea that that's relevant is same to me is the idea that you can bring up these ghosts of the Cold War. It's like, y'all, the Cold War ended 30 years ago. It's done. It's over. And most people have no recollection of it. And most people aren't that politicized in the first place. And they're just not getting the cultural hammering down of, just dumb, reflexive anti-communism, anti-socialism. And also, another point, every single president, no matter how right-wing neoliberal they were as a Democrat, has been called a socialist Marxist by Fox News and the right, to the point where the word just doesn't mean anything anymore. So, to be honest, I just don't see it working, but it's so dumb. And it was really amazing to me is watching people like Evan McMuffin do it when they're basically my age. They have, what recollection of the Cold War do you fucking have? I was 5 years old when the Berlin Wall came down. Yeah, I kind of remember it. Do you know what I also remember about that? The Ninja Turtles, because I cared more about that.
Yeah, I saw a, hold on, let me retake this. Yeah, I saw Stephen King from the horror author extraordinaire doing the McGovern thing as well, and how, like you said, you got to be in your 60s, and I just fucking hate that, why don't you read a book?
It's like Stephen King is worth like $400 million. Just right. Shut the fuck up, man.
First off,
he's actually better than most boomers in terms of his politics. But obviously, there is a limit to which the boomer brain can fucking travel. And yeah, Stephen King is way too rich and way too kind of floating in the morass of pop culture.
He can't write an ending to begin with, so of course he can't fucking see a good one here either. But yeah, it's just that, the you need to read a book and you need to study history, and it's that was like the idea that America is the same as it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, the marginal tax rate for people making over $500,000 was like 70%. Like the as I try to fucking explain to people why socialism is so cool and hip now among all the kids is because capitalism did great for people back in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Well, white people. Asterisk on capitalism there because capitalism,
white people in the West, in North America and Western Europe, were doing great at the expense of everyone else.
Exactly. You had the chance to get a house, to buy a house, to get a college education, all on a single blue collar job in a factory stamping metal, stamping holes into a sheet metal or whatever. You could like buy a boat and live the American dream. You can't do that anymore, and that's why everybody's like, this is fucked up, and we want to do a socialism now because capitalism, obviously unchecked and allowed to do whatever it does. Turns out it's absolute shit, and it fucks everything up. So yeah, you've got like this the entirety of everybody talking about some sort of historical election from the 1970s is completely overshadowing one. It's insulting, I guess, is what I really want to get to. It's insulting that like us as a generation, and not even you and me, Nate, because we're old now. We're in our 30s, which politically we're kind of in our primes, I guess, because this is when you really start to kind of give a fuck. But like younger generations are kind of coming into this, and they're being excited about it because every 17-year-old in high school is looking at the next 10 years of their life and they're going, well, fucking shit. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had options, like I don't want 17-year-olds to be like, well, I guess I'll just join the army and try to figure out what I want to do from there, because that's the only option you have is, live with your parents forever and work shitty retail jobs and get nowhere, or, go $50,000 into debt to get a college education that might not go anywhere. So yeah, not to get off onto too many fucking tangents about how I hate capitalism, because I will continue to talk about that for the next 20 minutes. But the idea that the boomer mentality and like the boomer ideology of we have to always be prepared to fight against the Cold War. We always have to be prepared to prevent another Cold War. When the USSR fell in 1991. And don't worry, every other communist country that pops up is like a small communist country trying to rebuild themselves from shit we probably did to them, or we allowed to happen to them, or that we, through some proxy war, tried to have happen to them. So don't worry, like, those communist countries aren't going to do anything. And while, Bernie Sanders praising Cuba, which, as if I was a communications director, I would have advised against that, but it's whatever. You're just going to have, you can't praise the Soviets, you can't praise Mao, you can't praise Cuba without like a large chunk of America shitting themselves and then hammering out a bunch of op-eds about it. As we said, Ana Navarro complaining about. Yeah, Ana Navarro is that person who's like, I hate the Cuban communists because they took away all my ponies. Like, how dare they?
Yeah,
Ana
exactly.
Navarro,
it's like how is this going to play in Florida? Well, right. I mean, all the people that I talk to who have the last name, like Gusano de Esclavaje, are really, really upset about Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, all the sugar plantation owners that I know that were expelled from Cuba are really upset about Bernie Sanders. Like, fuck off. Who cares? Who cares about Cuba, man? Stop giving a fuck about Cuba. Let people travel to Cuba from America. Like, it doesn't. The boogeymen of America is just so wild to me, because like our boogeymen are the Soviet Union, which hasn't existed since 1991, and Cuba, an island that like pretty much has become self-sufficient and doesn't fucking need us anymore. And like, we're still mad at Cuba. We're still mad at like Fidel Castro, and it's like we're mad because we didn't manage to like properly fund death squads. Like, Fidel Castro managed to like, I don't know, repel us or keep us from from deposing him or killing him with exploding cigars or whatever fucking Looney Tunes Acme bullshit that the CIA was trying to do. And we're just so mad at him still. And anyway, this kind of goes away from the point of, of what we wanted to talk about here, of, this like fucking, CIA kisses that people have. Like when the CIA is shit, like, and I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I'm kind of going off on a weird tangent here. So I'm gonna let you bring us all back here, Nate.
Here's the thing, right? I think that on the larger point of capitalism isn't working for us, and so why people want to try socialism, it's more because I do think that there are two sort of strains that I perceive. I think you have to be honest with yourself that it was never good enough if capitalism was working out only for enfranchised white people in America and everybody else was fucked over. And that absolutely is the story of America. So you cannot look at, the post-war era, let's say 1945 to 1973 as some golden age, because it wasn't. And there was so much injustice that continues to this day, but was even worse back then. And effectively, America has been broken, split down the middle, completely sclerotic and insane since the Civil Rights Act passed. Why? Because America was founded on racism and exploitation. And we have to come to terms with that in order to move beyond it. Until we do, if the best we can hope for is weird packaged nostalgia for an era that never existed, then we're fucked, because the right they'll always outflank us by saying, oh no, the enemy is here and must be destroyed. You have a bigger civic duty than having a decent life. It's to own the libs and to destroy the enemy. So we've got to be honest with ourselves. If you know people who you feel like are on the train for socialism, but it's because they basically want to call the manager on capitalism, I would hope that using the influence of your friendship and proximity, you can kind of bring them on board to understanding that the inequality that they're experiencing, the diminishing, worsening outcomes they're experiencing, those have been the norm for every other group besides white people, basically for all of America's history. You couldn't get ahead because the system was built so you could not get ahead. It would be illegal for you to get ahead. And we've got to be honest with ourselves about that. Similarly, we've got to be honest with ourselves that we've been the bad guys overseas, and we've used the argument of the Cold War and the justification of whatever. But before the Soviet Union was the boogeyman, before a Cuba-style missile base in Cuba, or in Nicaragua, or in the Dominican Republic, or in Haiti, or in any country we fucking invaded, Grenada, Panama, any of these places. Before we had the justification of stopping communism, we just had the justification of stopping whatever made-up brutality we were convinced was happening because, Cornelius Vanderbilt, wanted, or Andrew Carnegie, or fucking William Randolph Hearst wanted us to feel that way. If you look at, the history of the U.S. involvement in places in Latin America, particularly in the 19th century, and the British did this too, significantly more so in the 19th century than America, but then in the early 20th century, America very much took their place. No matter what, we always told ourselves we were doing something for human rights, and in fact, what we were doing was getting rid of any government that wanted to break up the absolutely feudal control of land that existed in these countries that allowed a small minority of people to basically parasite off the extraction of resources by foreign companies that made sure that there was no economic development in those countries where the resources were being extracted. So, whereas, a country that had a better platform, better situation for to profit off of its resources could then invest in things that could then develop specialties and could, enhance, give them better internal markets, basically commerce. Basically an aspect of capitalism. They weren't allowed to do that. They could only be extractor nations and then client nations to buy manufactured goods from the countries that did very well under capitalism. So what I'm saying here is that we've propagated this, we've encouraged this, we've enforced it through either proxy wars or actual wars. And that legacy continues to this day. And whether or not you want to admit that, whether or not you feel as though, no, this isn't true, America's always been good, it really doesn't matter, because you are only saying that to yourself to make yourself feel better about the fact that it used to work and it doesn't work anymore, or it used to be more effective and it's not as effective as it used to be. We need to come to terms with the fact that there are so many ways in which we could have avoided the courses of action that we took, unless if those courses of action were absolute, last ditch efforts to restore human rights or whatever the fuck we tell ourselves. But the fact that we always seem to go to war and we always seem to involve, doing disaster capitalism afterwards seems to indicate that maybe those crank things that you dismiss as crank conspiracy theories are more based in reality. And as such, I mean, I don't think that every time, Nicolas Maduro gets a cold, it's a CIA firing the fucking, influenza gun at him. But I do think that we've been involved in destabilizing so much, so often, that we're not doing ourselves any favors by pretending that's not the case. John Krasinski, Office Jim, can go fuck himself. I mean, whether or not he wants to believe that he's involved in making conservative propaganda, he absolutely is. But I also think that
I don't think we actually
it might be
talked about that. So the whole basis around this.
You did.
Okay.
You did mention the show. The thing about it is that one thing I'd point out is that, I mean, on one hand, make fun of him, but on the other hand, like, he's not necessarily any different than anybody else who's done any other entertainment in America. I mean, how many people in fucking America, have rediscovered what they perceive to be their Scottish heritage because they watched fucking Braveheart, a movie that is absolutely not historically accurate in any way, But that's the thing. That's how propaganda works, and so I think that Bernie Sanders is bringing this to a head. But these have been things that have been kind of swirling around for a while, and Office Jim doing a show where we have to depose Venezuela because they're gonna nuke America somehow is just a new permutation of that.
Yeah, and him being upset that people are calling it like conservative propaganda. He likes to say, "Well, I did fundraisers for Elizabeth Warren." And that's the thing, like, this kind of propaganda, this kind of, making... I mean, he made a Benghazi movie, for fuck's sake. Who talks about Benghazi other than, like, shithead conservatives? Who went and watched a Benghazi movie other than, a bunch of shithead conservatives? And probably people who really like Catherine Bigelow. I believe she's the one who directed that. But, the audacity of a, this goes along with that, like, we must support the troops at all time kind of thing, but this time it's the CIA, like, and without ever, like, saying, without ever taking a step back, and saying, okay, well, what exactly is the history of an organization like the CIA? Something that you and I have spoken about multiple times on this show, but to be, Office Jim, and to, he gets done being on The Office, and now he's weirdly like some kind of like conservative superhero to do all these fucking weird ass conservative movies, and then to be like, well, I don't understand why you guys think that I'm doing conservative propaganda. It just kind of shows that he's doing this thing where, in the article that we're going to post from Fox, he talks about, like, going and meeting all these CIA guys, and it's like you're meeting real world spies. It's like, you need to stop looking at the CIA like you're a fucking 8-year-old. Because that's how we all looked at the CIA when we were 8, right? We're like, ooh, they're super cool spy guys. They probably, you watch Spy Kids, you watch spy movies, and the CIA does cool spy shit. And you don't really, like, consider it beyond that. And when you get older, though, you're supposed to be that person who says, oh, they did cool spy shit, but they also funded Nicaraguan death squads. Which is less cool to an 8-year-old, not because it's horrifying, but because it's boring. I'm sure you'd rather watch Ninja Turtles too. But this is just like this is just the insidiousness of propaganda that the CIA has done, and then just like the absolute stupidity of people like John Krasinski of doing this. Well, I mean, I've got 11 aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and all these people who've joined the military, and I support the troops, and the way that I support the troops isn't going to be like, a Gary Sinise where you do like, benefits and if you're in a band and you do all these things for the troops, you can be one way or the other about Gary Sinise, but he actually does do things other than be in garbage ass conservative movies. Now we can have that argument about Forrest Gump being a garbage ass conservative movie, but it's not the Benghazi movie. All right, it's not on that same level. Forrest Gump sucks on a completely different level than Venezuela with the nuclear bomb. So it's just, I don't know. It's just I just hate people like this. It's childish. He's a child. He's got a child's brain. And it's probably because nobody's ever fucking challenged him on shit. He's never had to be challenged. And, it's not surprising because Jim was also like one of the shittiest characters on The Office. He was a huge piece of shit. Everybody else was way more useful and interesting, and Jim was just kind of a dickhead who kept pining over a woman that already had a boyfriend and kept fucking with like the one guy in the office who's like really good at his job. So fuck John Krasinski and every character that he's ever played.
Yeah, man. I mean, to be honest with you, it's dumb and it's a dumb argument. And I think that, but I think that I would rather talk about the weird legacy of Cold War, I guess kind of culture warriors trying to make that conflict relevant when, it's so long ago that, we as old millennials getting towards the end of what would reasonably be called being young, we only have the faintest childhood memories of the actual Cold War, of the actual, oh, wow, we might go to war, with the Soviet Union. That might be a thing. I think about this. My parents, my mom and dad would have been turning 19 in 1972 when George McGovern lost, when Richard Nixon won re-election. My parents are retired now. They're collecting Social Security, and they were freshmen in college when that happened. So
it's the way that they're trying to do it is it's all the Russia shit right now. Like, first off, Russia doesn't have a functioning fucking aircraft carrier that doesn't catch on fire randomly. Secondly, if Russia doing Facebook memes can influence an election, then we're a really shitty country, and we're
also
all really
Russia's
stupid.
not communist.
Right?
It's not a communist country. It's the archetype of the like capitalist oligarchy where everything is controlled by a shadowy group of people with way too much money, and they all defer to this insane dictator who's probably the wealthiest person on the planet because he's skimmed off the top of massive oil and natural gas profits for the last 20 years. I mean, Russia is not a communist country. They're not pushing Sanders or whatever because they want communism. If anything, if there was an actual communist party that was making headway in Russia, Putin would crush it. Like, that's not what they are. And so the idea, I mean, if they want a diminished America, that's one thing. But the idea that anyone who wants to see American influence diminished is by default a communist is such an absurd thing that, I mean, it would have been absurd to say in 1975. It's incredibly absurd to say now in 2020. Like, we were supposed to have fucking flying cars by this point level of living in the future. Like, no one cares. It just doesn't land. And I think the reason why we can say definitively that it doesn't land is because, having seen this happen in the United Kingdom, if it did seem like whatever they were mad about was landing, you'd see a million slick new media organizations pop up to do nothing but screech about this supposed thing that Bernie Sanders did that was bad and just blare that nonstop day in and day out, because it's 100% what they did with Corbyn about literally everything. And it turned out that they, eventually managed to wear people down, but it took years. They will try that with Sanders, but so far the ooh, he was on the wrong side of the Cold War shit hasn't landed, because why would it land? No one fucking cares.
Yeah, Russia, just stop. Like, every time we start having elections and you start getting a front runner, I mean, I remember in 2016, Putin wanted Hillary, Putin wanted Trump, Putin now wants Bernie Sanders. I don't give a fuck what Putin wants. Like, I don't give a fuck about Russia. Like, Jesus Christ, they're not a threat. They're not a threat in any way, shape, or form to Americans unless we allow it to be. The only threat that they are is, like, insane Russian hackers or like the weird Russian kids who can squat way better than American kids. Like if we want to go to war with Russia, that's what we need to concern ourselves with, is our squat game against the Russians. Yeah. It's funny. The other day I drove by a kebab shop and there was a Slavic guy. There's a little table and chairs outside of it, like a singular table and chair. And this guy was on his cell phone, smoking a cigarette and squatting on the chair. And I'm like, it's a chair. It's literally for sitting, but not for those guys, man. And that's something we can't compete against. That's the only level that we can't compete against, is using a chair for sitting. No, you must squat on it.
Dude, it's dumb. It's so dumb. Don't fall for it. Don't let yourself be propagandized by some of the dumbest people on the fucking planet. Just don't do it. However, this makes me so frustrated that I instead want to pivot to previewing our bonus for the week, because it was a fun conversation I had with a young troop named Kevin F., who is a pseudonym, obviously, but who recently deployed to Afghanistan and was connected to the web via his smartphone the whole damn time, pretty much, except when he was like on OPs. And his experience with being connected to the outside world was so radically different than what I experienced when I was deployed. So we talked a little bit about that, and then also about why he thinks if you're a troop, you should get out of the military, which is what he's doing. It was a great conversation. I really appreciated it. It made me feel old, but it also made me feel, I don't know, maybe a little bit excited about the fact that there are actually troops on active duty who listen to this show, and it might be influencing the way they perceive the world around them. So that's really cool. I hope you enjoy this. It's at the $5 tier on Patreon, and there is a link in the show notes so you can access it. You just got back from deployment, and you and I talk on, social messaging stuff while you were deployed. And I was kind of taken aback because I realized it didn't connect to me until a little while into it. I was like, I was able to stay in touch with people when I was deployed mostly via email, because I'd send them emails from my Afghan, like my, .swa.afghan.mil or whatever email address. But that's just because I was an officer and I had a laptop that I had to be working on. Like I was connected to the internet through the NipperNet when I was in my office, if I wasn't like on a mission or at like some base where they didn't have it. But for you were deployed and you were able to like rig up a thing with like a Roshan phone or an Afghan carrier to be able to be online while you were deployed. And that level of being connected to the regular world, I'm wondering, what was that like? Because for me, one of the weird things about being deployed was the total and complete disconnection from the regular world. Like effectively everything that happened in news and politics and pop culture in 2009 just doesn't exist to me. Like I have no recollection of it because I was gone from early February 2009 until March of 10. And so that whole period of like Obama got inaugurated, everyone lost their minds, Tea Party shit, I have no frame of reference for it. And I'm just wondering, what was it like? And B, how did you manage to be doing your job while you were deployed and also being connected in a way that folks who deployed way earlier in the war absolutely just technologically, physically could not be?
So, yeah, we're very privileged now to have near constant access to, either like Wi-Fi networks on, like, let's say, BAF, CAF, some of the smaller FOBs, but then also, yeah, like mobile carriers where you can get like a SIM card or you can like hook up with like a SIM carrier, and they will, give you effectively 3G service across all of Afghanistan. Now, granted, the war also has changed a lot since back then. It's become a lot more like focused on actually supporting, the local nation, the partner nations, like local forces, like ANA, ANP, all those guys, instead of going out every day and like taking turns sitting on a cop and drawing fire or doing like presence patrols, VSO. That doesn't really exist anymore. Like even like basically what happens nowadays is like regular army supports special operations and special operations supports like Afghan like army operations. We don't like, granted, like you'll still see like high profile, raids of like Rangers doing their thing, like 75th, or let's say SF doing like a kinetic operation instead of like supporting like an Afghan army or Afghan commandos raid into an area. So as a result, like there's a lot more downtime. There's a lot of like sitting around twiddling your thumbs time. And with the portability of like electronics nowadays, like we would just spend a lot of time like waiting to get the call like for like quick reaction force missions. And you would see guys playing on Nintendo Switches and stuff. It was pretty funny. Or like just playing iPhone games or calling their families. Yeah, and I mean, it definitely relieves a lot of the stress, I would say, from that isolation of constantly being there. Like it was an escape effectively from, Afghanistan. Like you could, go like listen to podcasts like definitely helped a lot while I was over there. Like there's something quite like I mean, not just like other podcasts, but listening to y'all's perspective was very funny because, the joke of, podcasts being like your imaginary friends and like inserting yourself into a podcast as a third member or third mic conversation, it definitely does help. Like imagining that there was like someone with a shared like my political viewpoint while over there, like and pretending like I was like in the room with y'all, with you and Francis.
That's amazing. I mean, it's weird to me. I'm pulling up Libsyn, our hosting platform, right now to see because it breaks down where the downloads are by country, and I'm wondering. I guess I never checked because there wasn't a significant number of them in Afghanistan, but I'm kind of wondering now with this conversation going on. Okay, so I mean, maybe this was all you. I don't know, but. No, it couldn't have been because it's only going back as far as November. Between November and now, there have been 111 downloads of our show in Afghanistan, which leads me to believe there's other troops out there listening to this show, which is insane. That's insane to me. Well, because it's weird. It's weird because I think about that. I had the problem that obviously I had political viewpoints that maybe weren't as like doctrinally left as they are now, but certainly in the kind of like general sense of things, I felt pretty similar to how I feel now. There's just a certain extent to which you're like not allowed to express it. But I mean, aside from my mom sending me like books off my Amazon wish list that were a bunch of Howard Zinn books, I didn't really have there wasn't like much of a connection. I certainly wasn't able to talk to anybody honestly about it because they were like, what are you, a goddamn communist or something like that? And it's like, well, actually, as a matter of fact, yeah, but you know what I mean though. Like if you try to have a conversation, like a frank conversation, like you'll get like Toby Keith lyrics dogpiled by people. Or at least that was my experience in an infantry unit, and you're in an infantry unit too, so I mean, fuck.
I was actually very privileged to be in not to reveal too much about who I was or what I did. I was in an infantry unit, but I was in a platoon that was a bunch of pogues, actually, that was stood up as an extra infantry platoon. Like, I'm not saying this is like, the goon squad that was stood up. They were combat MOS that got stood up like just as an extra infantry platoon with the extra different capabilities. If you could, you could probably guess what MOS they were, but either way, we often outperformed the infantry, so we did our thing, and a lot of them we were a little more relaxed, I would say, than the infantries, and there was different like not. This might sound a little weird to bring it up, but there were a lot more like people of color in that platoon than there were in the average infantry platoon. Like the average infantry, like platoon and company, were very white. No, I
mean, I was in an airborne unit based in Alaska. There were I think there was one black soldier in my regular line company when I was a platoon leader, and then when I went to the headquarters company, the only black and Hispanic soldiers we had were in like the S1 and the S4 shop, and that was it.
Yeah, so we were privileged to have a lot of like people of color, and as a result, I would say they have more of I'd say openness to discussing, why, America is not really great, that the war sucks, the army sucks, and like going, I'd say maybe a couple steps further into breaking down why that might be, and a little more openness to discussing that.
All right, everybody, as always, thank you so much for being a subscriber, for being a listener. Follow us. I'm on Twitter. I'm deactivated at the time of this recording. Maybe I'll be back by the time this comes out. So if I am Army Strang, you can follow Nate at In These Deserts. If I'm not on, you can follow the podcast at Hell of a Way. I do tweet from there from occasion, as does Nate. We're on YouTube. We're on the web at hellofawaytodie.com, where you can find all kinds of great products and writings and all kinds of things that we have there. If you sign up at the $10 level before the end of the month, you'll get part of our care package, which it sounds like at least one of my patch orders is coming through. The coronavirus has not, despite the CDC warnings, it's not completely crippled and brought China to its knees. It simply slowed things down a little bit. So care packages for all the $10 and up people will be coming if you are a $10 Patreon by February 29th. But other than that, thank you all for whatever support you can give us. Thank you for being listeners. And Nate, we'll talk to you next week.